Hello YouTube. In previous Tales of Genetics, I told you the stories of the guy who was a complete geek but had the body of a monster and he looked like an ape without hair. I told you the story about that powerlifter I met who had insane numbers after 6 months of training and who could become a world record holder in the future if he wanted because his genetics were that good. I told you the story about my roommate who was a bodybuilder who somehow had a better physique than mine without any real training and with a shitty diet. I also told you the story of African giants. All of these stories were great, but they lacked some level of details because even though I knew these people, I didn't have an intimate view into their life. Today, however, I'm going to be able to present to you the tale of a guy whose life I know intimately. I know every single detail, every single aspect of that person's existence. For one simple reason, that person is me. I am the focus of that Tales of Genetics, and I am the guy in the thumbnail if you hadn't recognized me yet. For today, I'm going to tell you what happened to me, the gift I was offered at birth, and the way I completely squandered it. That should serve as a cautionary tale for all of you guys, and for even myself, in fact, to remind ourselves that talent is a gift, but a gift that can be wasted. And also, it's going to make people who don't have a gift feel better about themselves, because you will see that by the end of this video, the very notion of genetics is going to appear as something much less important than it has been sold to you on YouTube Fitness. So let's get started. I picked myself because, unlike what you might believe, I was actually very good at a sport at one point in my life. I'm not gifted in terms of genetics for bodybuilding, quite the opposite, but I was extremely apt and extremely talented in one sport in particular, and that sport was swimming. I was, and I can say that without blushing, a genius swimmer. I was able to swim from a very young age. I think the first time I swam, I was maybe 3 or 4. And it's interesting too because this shouldn't have been the case as I've had a traumatic past with water because when I was 2 years old, I almost drowned. But the funny story about that is that my mom realized I was drowning. She jumped in the pool, and usually when kids at that age fall into the water when they don't know how to swim, they just go randomly and they sink like rocks. In my case, I was actually swimming, meaning that when she jumped into the pool, what she saw is me, her kid, doing the frog. I was already naturally able to do it for some reason, and I was desperately trying to reach the surface with that swimming style. The thing is that when you're a toddler, you have no muscle mass, and the way your body's shape is made in the fact that you just sink like a rock again. So I was just struggling to get to the surface, I just couldn't, but I was actually swimming. And she just picked me up and brought me back. And the same day I went back into the pool. So it didn't re-traumatize me or anything. And a few years later, I was swimming. And my level in swimming skyrocketed super fast, meaning that I still remember being, I think, 6. And in class in France, the way you do it is, when you have PE, you go to the local swimming pool, and the first day they check to see if you can swim, because a lot of kids can't swim at that age. And I could already swim perfectly. And I remember the way they would test it is they would tell you, okay, swim from here to here. And I did it, and because I was already very agile and comfortable in the water, I swam underwater. And I popped my head outside much further than I was supposed to go. And I remember the guy looking at me like a little bit suspicious, and he was like, I asked you to be above water. And I was like, oh, okay. He was like, yeah, just go into the advanced group. And it's a group where you could just swim and do whatever. So from that young age, with no swimming classes whatsoever, I was already really advanced. And it just kept going from there. I was always the best swimmer in my class. Even though outside of swimming, I was non-athletic. It was a little bit strange because I couldn't run really fast. I had no physical strength. But the second you put me into the water, I was like a fish. I was very agile. And eventually, my mom realized that I was actually really good at it, and I loved it. I loved swimming. So she put me in a swim club. And this is where the problems began, because even though I was already always better than the other kids, it was never in a competitive environment, so it never went to my head. Plus, every summer I would swim with my cousins that were like 5 years older, so they were better than me, of course. But the second I was plugged in a class with kids my age and we competed, I realized how better I was than them, how much better I was, and it started making me arrogant to the point that I was sort of bossing people around. And keep in mind, I was a runt at that age. I was a very small kid. I was 7 or 8. But the problem is that my instructors were so amazed at my talent that they never tried to reprimand me. They never actually scolded me for my shitty behavior, which they should have done. I should have been punished, but they never actually did it. And so I was just allowed to run unopposed, and I was a little tyrant that was doing whatever he wanted. And to give you again an idea of how good I was, at that age, before I was 10, I could swim the length of an Olympic swimming pool underneath the water without having to take a breath once. And I still remember when we were swimming laps to train to develop our ability to swim, I just ignored whatever swimming style I was supposed to do, and I was just going underwater for like the back and the forth. And the instructor was helpless because they desperately wanted me to stay so that they could win championships, but they also understood that it wasn't good, so they didn't know what to do. And so I was again left to do whatever I wanted to my own device. And that is what caused my problems down the line because, again, it got to my head. I became extremely arrogant, also because I was an insecure kid outside of that. In terms of physical activities, I was always the worst. I was always picked last in soccer, etc. So for once, I had an environment where I could express myself and dominate, so I did it as much as I could. And again, I made the other kids feel terrible because I was a genius. So I was telling them, hey, you really suck. Like I would tell kids my age, wow, you're super bad. Like you can't even crawl or you can't even do this and I can do that. Wow, you really must suck. I was taking all of my insecurity out on these poor kids and crushing their dreams in reality. And it got so bad that my instructor had to move me to a higher class and he put me with people who were 12 and 13 when I was 10. It sort of mitigated the problem because these kids were at my level. I was finally meeting people I can compete with, which is already insane because these were boys who were starting puberty and I was matching them or better than them. But at that point is also the moment where I had an instructor that didn't retake my shit and I was forced to train, and I hated that because what I liked was the freedom of swimming. So the second I was forced to run laps and everything, I just gave up entirely and I stopped. Also, in my head, I was thinking, well, I'm already the best, so what even is the point? Not realizing, of course, that I was literally a frog in a well. I was some kid in a small regional pool with no international competition, not even, in a sense, national competition, with no experience because I was like 10. So I knew nothing. My level wasn't that high. It's just that where I was put, I was better than others. But again, it went straight up my head. And I just stopped training swimming, thinking, well, I don't need to train. I'm the best regardless. The day I want to win at swimming, I'll just pick it up again. And you might think that this left me after a while, but no, this idea was always in my head. And the problem is that as I aged, my talent for swimming developed even without training, and I was always better than others. So, for example, I think the picture I used for the thumbnail was in the Caribbean. There was a specific beach that was called Petite Anse, and this was the most dangerous beach of the island where no one swam because the waves were too big, you couldn't swim. I was the only person in the water and I was like, I think 12 or 14, something like this, and I could swim in the currents, in the waves, which is insane, also very dangerous, but I was able to when physically strong adults were not able to. And again, this just confirmed what I already believed, that I was the best swimmer in the world. Because every single time I would get in the water, I would smoke people. At that age, when I would race with people, with my uncles, or with random adults, physically fit adults, I would beat them easy. So again, I was convinced I was the god of swimming on earth. Now, after spending so much time boasting about my prowess, there's going to be some payback. Because karmic debts need to be paid off at some point. So all of that time I spent with my big inflated head eventually went and bit me in the ass because, as I said, I went through my entire teenagehood believing I was the best. And then at some point, I was given an opportunity to prove that I was the best. Because for what we call le baccalauréat, I was allowed to take an optional swimming competition class where if I swam and I had a good time and I beat others, I would get additional points on essentially my SAT. So I was like, wow, bingo, I'm going to get easy points because again, I'm the best. At that time, I hadn't swam like seriously for like 2 years. And I remember just going one afternoon to the swimming pool, swimming some laps and thinking, yep, still got it. I'm going to crush the competition. And then I actually went to the exam. Now, first problem, I still remember showing up, seeing all of these guys were competitive swimmers, every single one of them, and then checking the times required to get a grade and thinking, these times are fairly low. I don't think I can swim that, but still, the delusion was here. I was still thinking, wow, no, it's nothing, I'll get it. So we prepare ourselves. Fun anecdote, I'm the only idiot who showed up in a Speedo, meaning that everyone could see my package. All of the other kids were wearing boxers, and we get in the pool and we start to warm up. And the pressure is starting to build up, but again, there's that voice in my head that says, well, you never lost at swimming. At this point in my life, I had swam a ton of races, hundreds of races, and I had never ever lost one. So I go into le pédestal, le plongeoir, as we call it in French, and I'm getting ready. Keep in mind, I haven't swam competitively for 2 years. I haven't trained my diving abilities at all. I don't know how to dive properly. I don't know how to do a flip under the water to kick off the board. My stroke is terrible. My technique is terrible. I have no stamina whatsoever. All of these factors, for someone who is a little bit intelligent, would tell you that something is going to go bad. But at that moment, I had no doubts in my mind I was going to win. The race was, I think, 25 meters, 25 meters, 25 meters, 25 meters. So 25 times 4, okay, 100 meters with 4 different styles. The first one was the crawl. We get in position, we jump, and we go. After the first lap, I am first. And here, you might think, okay, he's going to tell me he won again. Great. No. Listen, keep listening. After the first lap, I was first. After the second lap, I was dead last. Meaning that, like an idiot, I gave all of my energy in the first 25 meters, so I won handsomely, and then by the time I made it back to the other side, all of the other kids were already almost done. Meaning that when I was doing my third lap, they were out of the water. I had to do my third and fourth lap by myself with cramps all over my body, thinking I was going to die. Because I felt like I was drowning because my muscles were out of oxygen. I was detrained. I finished out of ego, but it was the most humiliating moment of my life. I couldn't even drag myself out of the pool. I had to be dragged outside because I had cramps all over my body, in my shoulders and arms. And I remember laying on the deck, and at this moment, a feeling I hadn't felt in a long time started seeping into me. And that is the feeling of modesty and humbleness, being humble. It took a public humiliation and a complete failure, a fiasco of a race to finally realize, wow, I'm not the best. I'm not even the second best. I'm the worst. I lost that by a mile. I suck. And it felt good. In the moment, it felt terrible, but it was important in my development as a young adult because it was catharsis. I was finally getting the comeuppance that I deserved for all of these years of making people feel bad about themselves because of my talent. And I remember standing up pitifully and the instructor telling me, okay, do you want to take the verbal exam now? It's like questions about swimming. And I was like, is there a point? And he was like, well, you have like minus 26 points, so no, there's no point. And I was like, okay. And I just left, took a shower and went home. But I reflected in the way home and I thought, okay, I lost because of my ego, right? And it made me realize one thing early, something that you guys might have not realized yet because this situation never happened to you. But it's sort of the conclusion of this Tales of Genetics and why I wanted to make it and talk to you guys about it. I was born with what can be described as God-given talent. You know, some people say that sometimes you're just really good at something. For me, that was swimming. I was just naturally able to swim almost perfectly from the day I was born. But the problem is that this gift became a curse. Because instead of actually training and working hard to improve, I just improved naturally with age. So I never felt the need to try hard. And that led me to becoming conceited. And what had it to happen happened. I ended up wasting my talent. Because talent is something you're gifted at birth, but if you never do something with it, well, it's for nothing. And I can tell you that every single guy at that race, that exam I was at, were less talented than me. I would put my hand, I would cut my own hand if they were more talented than me. But what happened is they were all competitive swimmers and they all trained for years. So in the balance of what's important to succeed in life, you have genetics and talent here, and you have hard work here. This is more important. I think you've all heard the saying, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. That is true, because talent might give you this much advantage. But then if hard work piles up this much, well, good, you have your talent. The guy here is still going to crush you. And all of these guys crushed me because they swam for years. And you know what's so funny? In that group of people, there was a guy who was in my swimming class when I was 9. One of the kids, I made himself feel bad about himself, and I told him, oh, you suck, and this and that. He never gave up. He kept training for years and years, and one day, he showed me that I was the one who sucked, with all of my grandiose talent that was reduced to nothing in the face of actual hard work. And that lesson I took with me, and I just carried it with me for the rest of my life, because I realized one thing. It's not about the cards that you're gifted at birth. It's about the way you play them. If you just get lazy and don't use them properly, guess what? They go to waste. They're for nothing. And in a sense, I would even argue that for some people, they would have been better off being born without talent than having all of that gift, all of that God-given ability that then made them feel arrogant, and so they never made anything of themselves. If I had just a tiny bit less talent, maybe I would have had that love and enthusiasm for the sport that kept me going, and I would be a very competitive swimmer today. We don't know because it never happened. The opposite happened. My talent weighed on me. It made me think I was too good for efforts, too good for trying. And I can tell you that I'm an example of that, and many people in that tales of genetics I'm talking about are also examples. They have so much ability. Everything comes to them so easily that it doesn't make them want to even try. And at the end of the day, what happens is they get nothing. They're mediocre for the rest of their life. So if you're the type of person that complains about their genetics, keep in mind one thing. This could be a gift. This could actually be an opportunity for you because now you're going to strive. You're going to actually give it your all because you were never given an actual ability to have a head start. You had to start from the very get-go, from the very beginning. And this is important because now you're a struggler, you're a grinder, whereas the guy who can just do this and he has everything has never learned how to work hard. And as I like to say, hard work doesn't lie. And I'm going to end the video on that. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.